I'm joined now by Republican Congressman David Valadao of California. Congressman, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. I know it's a busy time.
Thanks for having me.
So I am hoping you can help to give us a reality check because we are getting so many mixed signals coming out of these meetings. We know that the president and Speaker McCarthy described last night's meeting as productive. We also saw what negotiators said today, that they're no closer to getting a deal. You were presumably in the meeting with Speaker McCarthy today. What did he tell you? How close are they to reaching a deal?
Well, McCarthy didn't get into a lot of specifics this morning at our conference at 9 a.m., but he sounded optimistic, and even this afternoon at lunch, I know that there were some folks coming in from the White House, and the looks on some of their faces coming out of that meeting were positive, and so we do feel like we're close, and at least every conversation I've had with the speaker, I mean, Kevin and I border each other there in California with our district, so we spend a lot of time together. But everything I've seen, he seems optimistic and like we can get a deal done. I think we need to get all the more extreme positions, the extreme parts of our party just to back off a little bit and allow the speaker to negotiate with the president and find some sort of compromise that we can all work together on.
But that presumably is part of the biggest challenge here, that you have, frankly, you know, the two far ends of both parties who are in part driving these negotiations, weighing in. Do you think the speaker has room to negotiate a deal here and that he can get the votes once they have a handshake agreement?
I do believe he does. And the problem that we have here is we started asking the president to sit down over 100 days ago, and we passed our bill out of the House last month. And to wait till this last minute and then try to bring up some last minute issues as if he's been negotiating for a month is a problem, and it does complicate it. I think the president should have been at the table a lot longer ago. We would have a lot more flexibility to be able to have these conversations and actually filter through what needs to be done. But sadly, they waited till the last minute, and here we are today. But I do believe the speaker has the ability to come to a compromise. We just have to be mindful of the amount of time we have left.
The president's argument had been that he wanted to see the budget, he wanted to see the priorities of the speaker, and then, of course, the bill did pass through the House, and then that's when these talks started to resume again between the president and the speaker. But let me try to get you to drill down on what we think seems to be the biggest sticking point, which is about the spending cuts. Correct me if I'm wrong, but is that the remaining biggest sticking point? Or I should say, is that the biggest sticking point that's standing in the way of dealing with all of the other sticking points that remain? The length and substance of spending cuts.
No, obviously spending cuts are going to be a big part of it, and it's going to have an impact. But what we're asking for here, and this is a problem that we're seeing from the administration, is they're painting this as some sort of extreme position. But we're only asking to get back to where we were 5-6 months ago on spending. We're talking 2022 levels, and we're now in the 2023 budget year. But it's not an extreme position. It's something that we put out, we've talked about for quite some time. And for a president to act like he didn't have the opportunity to speak to us, I mean, the guy's been in Washington longer than I've been alive, and I'm in my mid-40s. He should understand that compromise is what this country was built on, and compromise is what the American people want him to do. And the only way to do that is to sit down and have a conversation with the people who run the House and bring in the folks who run the Senate, have those conversations and get to some sort of solution.
And Congressman, the White House is saying, let's freeze spending levels. That'll save $1 trillion. Why is that not good enough? Why not say that's a good start? Let's raise the debt limit for a certain amount of time around that spending goal.
I mean, we have to see how that plays out and if we can get the votes. I mean,
so would you support that, Congressman? Just to be clear, would you support freezing spending levels?
I think that's a possibility that I could support. It depends on what the rest of the package looks like. And we have to make sure that we look into the permitting reform, which is a big part of this as well. And when we talk about reducing the deficit, growth in our GDP is going to play a major part of that, and allowing businesses to be successful, allowing us to produce energy. I mean, all these things play a role in it. And so to say that I'll commit to just one piece of it when we have to look at the whole package, I think is very important.
And I know that yesterday we heard a lot about taxes, the president saying, let's close loopholes and essentially ask wealthy Americans to pay a little bit more in taxes. Speaker McCarthy has said that's not the issue. The issue is not about new revenues. It's about spending. Do you agree with the speaker's assessment there, or could you back potentially closing some tax loopholes?
Oh, I absolutely believe the problem is about spending. I mean, the amount of spending that's going on right now is just out of control, and we have to get this under control. And there are dollars out there, especially during COVID, during the pandemic, which falls on two administrations, not just one. But we do have to get this back under control and get us back to where we should be, which I think 2022 is a reasonable place. And when we ask for that, we didn't get into specifics about different departments. We just want to get the top line down under 2022, and then we can work it out from there.
So taxes are off the table for you, closing tax loopholes?
I do believe that tax increases are off the table for myself and most members of Congress, yes.
We also heard Speaker McCarthy kind of throw cold water on this newer idea that's being floated by the White House, health savings, targeting Medicare Part B, where the government is seen as overpaying private health companies. He threw cold water on that, but why not support that idea if it could save money?
Well, the reason why we're probably he's pushing back on that is just because it's so last minute to be bringing something like this up.
But would you support it if it were in a final deal, Congressman?
I mean, it's something we should be talking about, but to say it's going to be in a final deal just to throw something out there isn't appropriate, especially this late in the game. I mean, we've been talking about bringing the president to the table for a month now with a plan in place that he can point to, and to be throwing these last-minute things out there just to shake the room up isn't productive. And but it's a conversation that should be had for the long term. Obviously, there's opportunities there, but this late in the game with so much on the table, it just seems a little frustrating that the president would play these types of political games.
I do hear you expressing some optimism that something will get done in time, and I'm wondering if you can help us understand what that looks like. Do you think it will be a long-term deal, or do you think a short-term deal is looking likelier, given that we're so close to the June 1st deadline?
I actually think it'll be a longer-term deal. At least on the debt ceiling, I do believe it'll get through. I don't know if the president wants to go through this again, and I know the majority of members in the House and Senate do not want to go through another debt ceiling fight before the next election cycle.
I want to ask you big picture, because obviously President Biden's running for re-election. A lot of people are looking at this and saying he will be judged in part by what happens right now. Do you think the same is true for Speaker McCarthy? Do you think his job, his speakership, is on the line right now?
Well, all of our jobs are always on the line, and we always face another election. I do believe the president will be judged. I do believe the speaker, and I do believe myself will be judged. I mean, every time that we do anything here in Washington, American people are watching us. But for a person like President Biden, who even just in the last few weeks put out his new campaign ads about being the unifier and talking about compromise and working together, but does nothing to sit down at the table with us, it's not going to go well for him. And I think that we're seeing the results of that in some of the latest polls.
All right. Congressman Valadao, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.